And we can proceed now on that basis. So, Mr. Perry, you were introducing the report.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Member Gillen.
Mr. Chair, I would like officers' advice on the status of the motions that I foreshadowed and were seconded and you accepted for this item. And I ask you not to rely on standing orders which says that the chair can, the chair's ruling is final, because if that was the case in every item, then we would not need standing orders, we would just need the chair to, wise as the chair might be. And so it is really only where the standing orders might be vague and a lack of interpretation. But I've been around a long time now, and when I've been at any formal meeting and foreshadowed motions have been accepted as foreshadowed, they become the substantive motions. Not as
so you
I'll
want
take
your
that into
response
account
from
as some
officers.
sort of amendment.
I don't know if officers are able to provide a response to that, but if either
It's a simple question on meeting procedure.
well, again, Mr. Perry, are you in a position to answer that?
Yeah, I am. Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding was at the time, Member Gillen, you tabled your resolutions under the deputation. My understanding was at the time that the chair indicated a desire to take those motions under item 11. I haven't been around politics as long as you have, but this is the first time I've ever seen anybody table motions or potential amendments under a separate item. So my read of it was certainly that the chair gave the direction that those would be considered under the item later on. How he has decided to manage that is his call.
So that response has been provided, Member Gillen.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question on that. So the fact that they were accepted as foreshadowed motions and a seconder was asked for and given, and then they were accepted by the chair as foreshadowed motions under item 11, is it? Then you're saying that has no bearing on the situation.
All I'm saying is that the chair has made a call on how he wishes to deal with the item.
Okay, so the matter has been dealt with, and now we will move to the presentation of the report. Member Cohen.
I request that my point of order under 3.10.17, can I have it noted in the minutes and also your decision, please?
Yes, there's no problem with that. We can have that listed in the minutes. Mr. Perry, presentation of the report.
Sorry, point of order then, Mr. Chair. And then I request too that my request and the answer given be noted in the minutes as well.
We can also have that noted in the minutes. Mr. Perry, presentation of the report, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, we discussed the substance of the report at the public workshop last week. I don't necessarily want to relitigate that stuff at the moment, but I'm still happy to take further questions if there are any. Just to bring to the board's attention a few additions and a few amendments. In particular, the agenda that originally went out had an error in it under paragraph 4, where there was reference made to half of all participants selecting reverting of the land to use as public open space as their second preference, with the percentage given as 56. That was an error. So we have provided, along with all copies of the agenda that are here today, and we have updated the online version of the agenda there, and members have been given an insert in their agendas as well with the proper wording under paragraph 4, which currently reads, over half of all participants, 57%, selected retaining Takapuna Beach Holiday Park with upgrades as their second preference, followed by just over a quarter of respondents, or 26%, who selected reverting the land to use as public open space. So that's an amendment that has come through since original publication of the agenda. In addition, members have been provided with all copies that we are in receipt of public forum submissions made to the workshop last week. So I believe there are about 5 or 6 of those out of the 9. So those are what were available at the time of the meeting. In addition to the report and the presentation given to the board last week, there are some additional attachments that I would just like to draw your attention to, in particular attachment C, which was on the board agenda on the 21st of April, which outlines the decisions reached by the Takapuna Beach Reserve Working Party, which outlined the pros and cons of the options that went out for public consultation. In addition, at attachment D, we have done a bit of a desktop analysis of the various options and how they relate to the objectives or outcomes in various board strategic documents. So in particular, that's the local board plan, the Takapuna Center plan, the reserve management plan, and in addition, we have a tabled document somewhere in my stack of papers around the area plan. So that analysis has been provided to you. And in addition, we've also provided copies of the hearings report that went to the hearings panel on the Takapuna Beach Reserve Management Plan. So that's a report that was dated on October 12th, October 2012, my apologies, which goes into some detail about public views that were received as part of that process. So other than that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. So before we proceed to speeches on the item, are there any questions? Questions from Member Gillen?
Thank you. A couple of questions here, and I think starting at page 99, attachment D. Facilities that enable community well-being, and say under options 1 and 2, it says it does not include community facilities. But yet under option 3, it says that the hub will provide community access to things which include Takapuna Boating Club and Wakaama. Now, those facilities are already there. And so surely if there was open space, does that mean the leases to those groups will be terminated? Or if there was an upgraded holiday park, the leases to those groups would be terminated? Because I can't see that either of the other two options would actually lead to those clubs not being there anymore. So therefore, those facilities would be provided under those other two options as well.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to be quite clear, independent of any of the options that are on the table at the moment, the leases for both Wakaama and Takapuna Boating Club are provided for in the reserve management plan. So those will endure regardless of what happens on the reserve until those leases are up for renewal. So Your point is taken. It would have been sensible to include those particular facilities in this section. That was an oversight on my part, but there wasn't any intention behind it.
Thank you. Then if we go to page 101, and mainly under option 2, each of the paragraphs starts off with the holiday park is not contemplated in the reserve management plan. But in actual fact it is. And our option wasn't just retain the current camping ground, it was retain Takapuna Beach Holiday Park with upgrades, and one of the upgrades contemplated in the management plan was for motorhomes. And that actually has not been ruled out under this option. So again, well, and actually there's another leg to that. It's almost irrelevant whether it's contemplated in the reserve management plan, because a lease can be given, and the reserve management plan changed at some later date, which could be in 10, 20, 30 years' time. So it just concerns me. We talk about, and I accept these are probably oversights, and it was a desktop exercise and all of that, but it does influence people's thinking when they read those sorts of comments there. So I'd like a response on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the analysis was done based on the current read of the management plan. So when looking at retention of the Takapuna Beach Holiday Park plus upgrades, the view was taken that is essentially the current operation plus enhancements. So if you start from that point, basically that activity is not contemplated in the reserve management plan, but your point is taken that the activity could endure independent of the reserve management plan process itself.
Okay.
But that was the logic behind doing that. So in easily marrying option 2 against a reserve management plan where that is not specifically listed in it, hence the comment.
Okay, so could the same comment apply then to the marine hub, which isn't contemplated in the reserve management plan either, although marine activities and some sorts of structures, and which I think probably were dinghy lockers, were contemplated, my understanding primarily to allow the Takapuna Boating Club and Wakaama and those sorts of things to exist.
So through you, Mr. Chair, not wanting to get into a debate around the use of the term contemplated and what that means, that is a reasonable conclusion you could draw.
Okay. And then if we go to page 103, again, option 2, and it seems that most of the issues really focus on that. On option 2, again it says whether it's consistent or inconsistent with the plan. And I also note it actually says with option 3 is uncertainty over the consistency with the plan. So that's useful information. But again, I think the issue here is it says it's inconsistent with the plan, but the next bullet point says that self-contained motorhome accommodation is contemplated. So it's a little bit misleading, is it not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it does say that self-contained motorhome accommodation is contemplated, but the second half of that sentence says that this does not include tents, caravans, or chalets. So it's a qualified statement in my view.
Okay. Then,
just, if I may, Mr. Chair, just to be quite clear, this is advice that has been provided to us by Council's policy department. So I can't.
What department? Sorry?
Council's policy department,
okay.
not local board services staff.
No, sure.
So I can speak to some degree about the advice given here. However, you'll note in my covering report in the last section around in the event that the board wants to pursue a particular course of action, my strong advice is that you seek advice from relevant subject matter experts, simply for that reason.
Well, perhaps my next question might fall into that category, but I hope it can be answered here tonight. And that is, if we look at the next steps in implementation and estimated costs, there's quite an emphasis put on having an independent chair or commissioner being recommended, and also a report to community development and culture, arts and culture, and park, sport and recreation. So my first question is really, if we consider these activities, why would there need to be a report on the one hand to community development, arts and culture, which I presume is the council committee, and the other is if the plan to incorporate a new use prior to granting a lease has to go to Parks, Sport and Recreation. And then my next question is, why would there need to be an independent chair or commissioner for those? Because nowhere else does it actually advise that you have to have hearings for granting a lease. The board is empowered to grant a lease. And I wouldn't have thought that we would be required to have hearings. And in fact, if it's a minor amendment to the reserve management plan, we probably wouldn't need hearings either.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I can't speak for the officers who put this together, but in the interest of trying to provide you with an answer to your question, my read of this is based on the assumption that most of these activities are under the premise that the reserve management plan itself would be reviewed in some way, shape, or form.
Okay.
Hence the rather drawn-out process.
So if we look at C, it says no need to notify the intention to review the plan as recent consultation on the concept plan is sufficient, which is a consultation that we've just done. And therefore, if it's sufficient, then it should stand as it's read rather than be misinterpreted. The second bullet point is consultation not required if an amendment does not involve a comprehensive review. And earlier, the understanding is that if a lease was granted, then it wasn't deemed to need a comprehensive review, just a minor amendment. So again, If hearings aren't required, why is the advice that there needs to be an independent chair or commissioner?
So through you, Mr. Chair, this is certainly one of those areas that we're starting to get into areas that are beyond my expertise. So in the event that the board does want to investigate this option further, we could certainly ensure that those questions get answered as part of a future report.
Okay, my last question on this here then is, if a resource consent is granted for the Nausc Centre, the advice is that there's no further public consultation required. And why would that be when the parameters of consultation under the resource consent are very narrow, whereas what the board would be contemplating would be a lot wider? If it went to consult on that issue, it would be far wider than just what the resource consent hearings would entail.
So through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that central government has tried to take steps to take activities under the Reserves Act and those under the RMA, or the Resource Management Act, particularly where those activities are closely linked, to try to make it a bit easier to navigate public consultation processes. Hence, I think that's how you arrived at that conclusion. I will say, however, sitting behind you are two lawyers who, my apologies to you, Nicolette and Bram, would you be able to offer further comment on Member Gillen's statement or query?
At the turn, if possible.
Yeah.